driving back to the city. Then something happened.
You want to stay here, but we're staying here.
We need to get them out of here.
I need to think everything's gonna be okay.
Everything is going to be okay, isn't it?
We are seeing ongoing cyber attacks across the country.
I'm Carmen Twillie Ambar, president of Oberlin College and Conservatory. Welcome to Running to the Noise, where I speak with all sorts of folks who are tackling our toughest problems and working to spark positive change around the world. Because here at Oberlin, we don't shy away from the challenging situations that threaten to divide us. We run towards them. In Rumaan Alam's 2020 novel, Leave the World Behind, a white family rents a swanky Airbnb in the Hamptons on Long Island for vacation. When the black couple who owns the house unexpectedly turns up, you might think you're in for a social satire about race, until the story morphs into an apocalyptic thriller. An unknown global disaster is knocking out cell phones and causing weird happenings like deer stampedes and flamingos gathering in swimming pools. Written before the COVID-19 lockdown, Leave the World Behind eerily anticipates our feelings of isolation, dread, and denial in the face of an invisible threat. The 2023 Netflix adaptation starring Julia Roberts, Mahershala Ali, and Ethan Hawke captured the novel's creepy atmosphere and currently ranks among the top 10 most popular English language films on the streaming service. Alam's newest novel, Entitlement, follows Brooke, a 33-year-old black woman raised by a white mother in New York. After an unfulfilling stint as a teacher, she lands a dream job with an 83-year-old billionaire seeking to give away his fortune. Released a few months before Trump's inauguration, where guests included some of the world's richest men, Entitlement is a prescient exploration of the influence of the ultra-wealthy and their power to change the way we live and behave. Alam has a knack for predicting cultural shifts and capturing them with precision on the page. We'll discuss this gift and more on this episode of Running to the Noise. So, Rumaan, welcome to Running to the Noise. Thank you so much for doing this podcast.
Oberlin alumni cannot say no when Oberlin College comes calling. So it's a great pleasure.
You know what? I'm going to take that and put it on a loop. So before I call anybody, or right before I call, let me just say what Rumaan said. I love that. So I've been so excited to talk to you. I know that Oberlin is special to you. Maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about why this institution has been so important to you.
There was a feeling for me at Oberlin that the sky was the limit because I was a kid with a plan. Oberlin at the time, again, I started in 1995. It was rarer then for undergraduate institutions to have a creative writing major.
Yes.
But Oberlin did have one.
That's right.
I knew that I was going to major in creative writing, even though it was competitive. I felt very confident about my ability to do that. I have this notion that the department at the time, the language that they used to describe the major was that it was for writers of serious purpose. The institution respected its members.
Yes.
So these are 17 and 18-year-old kids.
Mm-hmm.
But the school was saying, okay, you are writers of serious purpose. And in fact, they were.
Yes.
I was in these very rigorous workshops led by rigorous writers much older than me who respected me and took me seriously and took my work seriously. And that was always my plan going to Oberlin, that this was my vision, that I was going to do that. And I had a more kind of responsible part B that I was also going to major in English, which is funny now it sounds like, oh, that's the reasonable major, the marketable major.
Yes.
And that I would find a way forward. I would find a way to work in publishing, which is in fact exactly what I did.
I will tell you a little side story about, some of you in the audience know that I have 17-year-old triplets who are in the process of applying to college. And my daughter came to an Oberlin event, and one of the things she got a chance to do was to sit with creative writing faculty at the end of the day. She has some aspirations there as well. And what she said as she left that event One of the things that really impresses me about Oberlin Mom is that people care about what students think here.
I think that's right. And I think a lot of what I was able and have been able to accomplish since then is predicated on this idea that, okay, the school took me seriously as I was taking myself.
Yeah.
And I could then sort of hold myself to that standard. And it has served me well. And I have found a footing professionally right after school in ways that are deeply connected to Oberlin, in fact, because it was Oberlin alumni who helped me begin my career.
So maybe you could tell us that story about how you found that incredible job that I think every creative writer would want. Just tell the story of how you got into the role that was right after Oberlin.
Throughout my time at Oberlin, I had a relationship with The Review, the world-class student newspaper.
Very much so.
I wrote with a colleague on the popular culture. We wrote a lot about television. This had come to the attention of one of my professors, Jeff Pence, in the English department, who said to me, you seem to be very interested in this kind of magazine-y sort of journalism.
Right.
And a woman who I went to Oberlin with, named Kim France, is coming to speak about her career in magazine publishing.
Right.
So you should come to our house and we'll have dinner and you can talk to this woman. It was a very kind invitation.
Right.
And the kind of thing, again, that a school like Oberlin, you have relationships with your professors who say, come over for dinner. I want you to meet this woman.
That's right. This is a great story, but not a unique story in terms of students being able to have dinner with their professor and a colleague and a friend comes over and lots of wonderful things happen from there. Yeah.
And life, in fact, really can change in those moments. I meet this woman named Kim France, an Oberlin alum. She had made quite a career for herself as a writer for Spin magazine. She was an editor at New York Magazine. She was, at the time, although I didn't know this, engaged in a project for Condé Nast publication. She was working on the prototype of a new magazine. I sent Kim an email after I had graduated. She emailed me back and said, come visit me. So I went up to her office. She showed me what she was working on. She spent 45 minutes with me. A real act of generosity.
Right. A
couple of weeks later, I sent her another message just to say, thank you so much. It was great to see you. It was such an education. And she emailed me back and said, talk to this woman at Condé Nast HR. You can come and be my assistant.
Wow.
And that's in fact what happened. I was there during the launch of what was called Lucky magazine. And that's like the fairy tale ending. It's less about the job offer, although understandably your seniors are thinking about the job offer, no question. It's about the opening of that door and the particular treatment and that sense that, oh, no, you are welcomed in. Mm-hmm. It's sort of important context to know that I'm talking about the 2000s, like the 90s into the 2000s, a very different time in American life.
Yeah.
I had always had a sense of myself as belonging in my childhood and belonging at Oberlin. Of course, Oberlin is a place where everybody belongs.
Right.
The freakier, the better, right? Like it is a place of belonging.
Listen, as I say about us, we're a place that celebrates difference.
Yes.
We celebrate difference. That's who we are. Yeah.
It is unfortunately still rare, though, in this culture, right? Institutions do not all function in this way. And Condé Nast is now a quite different company than it was 25 years ago. Right. At the time, it was a very rarefied place, kind of a finishing school for largely women, not exclusively, but mostly women. You encountered a lot of the daughters of vast wealth in New York City. I was briefly working at another magazine, and one of the interns was the granddaughter of a very well-known American billionaire, and she was pushing clothing racks around the office, and you just had this sense it was the first time in her life she had ever had to hang anything on a hanger because she just hadn't had that experience of life, you know? And it can be an awakening, a rude one, but maybe a necessary one, to go from a place like Oberlin, where you are taught to value yourself and you are shown by your peers and your colleagues that the institution cares about you, to find yourself in a context where that may not necessarily be the case.
Yeah.
I hardly need to explain this to a Black woman in America, right? You are prepared.
And I would just say, Rumaan, I don't want to steal your thunder, but yes, I'm sure that Condé Nast has changed a lot. But I do think that it's not atypical for students of different backgrounds to have stories like this.
Oh, yeah.
Even in this era.
There are so many levels on which this could be happening.
Right,
You
right.
could be a first-gen college student whose parents don't understand this kind of white-collar work. There are all these ways to find yourself as the fish out of water.
That's right.
And to suddenly have what happened is I sort of had these like small experiences of awareness or friction that I arrived at the security gate and they thought I was a messenger. Right? Which is famously something that has happened to Hilton Els, the Pulitzer Prize winning critic at the New Yorker. Right. So this is it wasn't the world against me.
Right.
It was the world as it is. And to realize that I didn't entirely belong to the world to which I had aspired did do something to me. It did sharpen my ambition.
Right.
And I allowed myself to be healthy about it, to say, right, you are never going to be a straight white guy. You can't aspire to that. You can't aspire to be treated as though you are, because that is the recipe for your own ruin. You have to be amused by it and look at it straight and know precisely what it is. To know that your difference may mean you do not live up to someone else's standard, but someone else's standard is incorrect.
I love how you said you handle it in a healthy way, because I think this is a challenge oftentimes for people who are seeing their difference through the lens of someone else in the moment. And how do you handle that in a healthy way? You said it also fuels some ambition in you too, right? So I'm not going to be a victim about it, so to speak, even though I may be frustrated by what happened.
Right.
It's going to fuel something in me.
It's just the way it is. I'm raising two Black sons, as you are, right? My older son is 15. So he's sort of, to me, he looks like a baby, but he stopped looking like a baby to the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Right? It's freezing cold in New York this winter, and he was running out to the store for me and put on his balaclava, his mask that covers his face. And he's just has like big eyes sticking out of his mask. And I said, oh, baby, you can't wear that to the store.
No, the audience can't see me shaking my head, but all the time the woman's been talking, I've been going, no, we can't do this. Yes.
And he said, why? And I said, because people will think that you are a criminal. And I was like, you look very cute in that hat, and it's freezing cold outside, but you cannot wear that to the store. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Because it is better for him to know that and understand that and not agonize over it. He would be right to agonize over it because it is unjust, but it is simpler and healthier to simply say it as it is.
Yes.
He then gets to decide how he will deal with this.
Right. No, this so resonates with me because those of us who are raising children of color, and in this instance, Black boys, Black girls too, but Black boys, we all talk about the talk that we have with them around what it means to navigate through a society that sometimes views you from a particular lens. And I did this thing with my children as they were getting ready to drive. I asked a local police officer to come to my house and actually walk them through a traffic stop and actually handcuff them and actually do that process. And I'm sure some people listening to this would be like, why would you make them go through that type of thing? And it's because I'm trying to prepare them for the world as it is.
I think that's right. I think you can control your responses to that.
Yeah.
And what I'm describing isn't oppression. It's unjust.
Yeah.
I'm a rich, healthy, expensively educated person, so I can't really claim oppression. But I can acknowledge to myself that I had an experience that was disenchanting, to feel that I had a career that I really wanted in magazine publishing, and to realize that there were limits to what I was going to be able to accomplish. And that was okay, because that's not the most important thing in the world to me. What was more important is making a living, having a family, pursuing my art.
Was that sort of the impetus and the kind of ambition that led you to not be in the comfort of a kind of salaried position that comes with maybe Condé Nast in that world, and to strike out on your own with novels and this sort of world where you really have to pursue this with this passion and dedication and hope that things work out in all these wonderful ways that they have for you? Was that the thing that made you do that?
It's a bit of lunacy, isn't it, on my part? It hadn't occurred to me, but to connect the dots back to my experience at Oberlin College, right? When you were a upperclassman in the creative writing program, the bulk of your credit is not really derived from a classroom experience. You're having a kind of one-on-one standing meeting with a professor producing pages.
Right.
The last 3 semesters at Oberlin, I was in fact a part-time student because I had enough credits. So I was going to school part-time and I was working in the town of Oberlin. And I had a real feeling of independence, that I was stitching together the life that I wanted. I was writing and meeting with Dan Shawn, who was my faculty advisor at the time.
Right.
And that I was working at a restaurant and I was working as a nanny in town. And I had made the life that I wanted in this sort of beautiful microcosm of Oberlin, Ohio. And I sort of brought the same attention to my life in New York City, where I jerry-rigged the kind of feeling that I wanted of a little bit of work here, a little bit of work here. We had a kid. I was able to put it all together and make it work. This was unusual then. It's more common now as the economy has shifted toward gig work and away from institutional employment.
You have to remind the context that you're doing this in a world. We think of the gig economy here at Oberlin because so many of our students are in the arts and music. It's kind of an understood that you're going to be stitching it together, right? We provide them with kind of business courses and other things to help them stitch it together. But you're right, that wasn't necessarily how you saw things in 99 and the early 2000s.
After this sort of like foray into magazine publishing, I was able to return to the core ambition, which had been the same when I was applying to college, when I was a child, when I was in elementary school, was to be the person who wrote books. That was always the ambition. The idea of working in publishing was a way of pursuing that responsibly, of saying, I have a job, I have health insurance, I have some structure to my adulthood, but I wanted this life as an artist.
It's such a wonderful lesson for our students about how you find your way to this thing that you've always wanted to do. You've had such success, really incredible success. Tell me what's on your writing desk right now?
I keep my desk very simple.
Okay.
I have a pencil, a big notebook that is specific to the book that I'm writing, a pencil sharpener, and a banana. That's my reward for the end of the day. Unfortunately, if you're working on a computer, you have every distraction available to you. You have all of human knowledge right here in this stupid metal box that you're staring into. I try really hard not to play around. I put on some music and I do my job. My goal is always to write 5 pages a day when I'm writing a novel, because it seems very modest, but it accrues over time. You're talking about 25 pages a week. You're talking about 100 pages a month. After 3 months of this, you probably have the draft of a novel. A bad draft, a messy draft. But so much art is about that discipline, to show up and simply do it. And some days it goes really well, and some days you're agonizing and it's 6 p.m. and I'm only on page 3 and I'm like, how did I waste all this time?
Right.
But you return to it again and understand it, or I understand it, as a practice.
One of the interesting things about Stephen King is he argues that if you don't have time to read, then you don't have time to write. One of the things that you said in our alumni magazine in 2023 was that you read 114 novels that year, which, as a mom of triplets, and I know you have 2 kids, I thought to myself, what the heck? Is he just trying to make us all look bad? What is going on here? But maybe you could just tell us, how do you choose the titles? Like, how are you choosing the books you read? And what does being a voracious reader mean to you?
It is simply who I am. That sort of deep connection to literature and that feeling that you're never going to run out. You're never going to get anywhere close to being what I would call well-read. It's actually impossible. There's always some writer you've never heard of. There's a writer in translation who you've never encountered. There's a great American classic you haven't read. I've never read Moby Dick. That's still out there waiting for me. Okay. You know?
Yeah.
And that
you can skip the whaling chapters. You can just...
But to me, I think there are readers who find that daunting. I find it liberating because it takes the pressure off. You don't have to have read everything, and you don't have to have read everything by a certain age. And it doesn't expire. Books don't go bad the way that yogurt does. You can come to it when you come to it.
Yes.
I fall in love with a writer and I want to read their entire body of work.
Choose an author and then read the 7 books that they have written.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's such a great way to educate yourself. all respect to Stephen King, I would point out that I have personally found it very enriching to engage with other forms of work, to watch a film, to go see painting, to see live performance.
Yes.
It's impossible to predict how that will enrich or sharpen what you're trying to do on the page.
You're willing to take other forms of artistic endeavors as inspirations and opportunities for you to think about things that you might not have imagined.
Absolutely. And if nothing else, even if it doesn't lead to something in your work, it's part of the point of being alive. You should go listen to Stravinsky on a Wednesday evening because it's there. It's there for you. It's a gift for you. And you should take that gift. I have only found that to enrich my practice of being a writer. If one understands the relationship to art like that, as casual, as constant, as a part of your life, rather than this thing that is set aside or special, then I think it only enriches you just as a human being.
It's such a powerful testament to how art influences the way we perceive the world. So what are you reading right now?
Right now, I am reading Thomas Mann's novel, Dr. Faustus, which is the story of a great German composer who has accomplished to reach the pinnacle of artistic expression via a deal with the devil. Thomas Mann is one of my favorite writers. The Magic Mountain is an extraordinary novel. It's one of those books that's out there waiting for you. It's a big, long book that understandably contemporary readers are like, oh, I don't know if I can read this big, long book about this guy at a sanatorium in the mountains spending 7 years doing nothing. But if you're in the right place, and you come to that book at the right time, it can be so wholly absorbing. I really relish that experience of wrestling with a book over a period of a couple of weeks, even months. Americans can be too focused on productivity and consumption, all that stuff. I think it's okay to have this relationship with a book where you read 5 pages of it 3 nights a week, and then you're like, wow, I'm really thinking about this interesting, weird German novel. There's no right way or wrong way to read, I don't think.
I'm so glad you said that, because I do think that sometimes the reason why we maybe shy away is because we think we're treating it almost like a job, right? Like this thing has to be done. And our inability to get through the first chapter in the first 2 nights makes us go, oh my God, I just can't do this anymore. And it reminds me of an experience that I had when someone taught me how to go to a museum. Because I used to go into museums and spend all day there and just sort of wear myself out and not really see things the way I wanted to because I was trying to get through it. And someone said to me that the way to go to a museum is to remind yourself first that you'll be back, and then decide that you're going to spend 2 hours and you're going to go see some of the favorite pieces that you think are there, and then go through the special exhibit and eat at the new lunch places that they always have there. And it took so much pressure off the museum experience to me, which I love to go to museums. And it gave me this kind of light way of always saying, oh, yeah, of course. Which you've just given me another light way to think about reading a novel, right? Don't put so much pressure on myself.
You're not an undergraduate anymore. If you're an undergraduate, you have 2 weeks to read that book. You better read it.
That's right.
You got to write the paper. You got to deal with it. But when it's just you're able to dabble in it, you should enjoy that liberty.
I didn't want to finish our conversation without getting to 2 works in Leave the World Behind. Strangers are stuck in a house together, and the world is undergoing this kind of mysterious, unidentified disaster. And we are learning about these people who are in this house together. And one of the things I think is so fascinating about when you wrote this book, like it's right before the pandemic. I feel that both this book and Entitlement is kind of a crystal ball. You've kind of been prescient in what's been happening in the world, because when you all read Entitlement, you'll know that it's a book that talks about the ultra wealthy and the influence of power and money. And I don't know what that may feel like, but it feels to me like now. I'll just tell my biases out loud. So maybe my first question is really about Do you feel like you have a crystal ball?
What I think really is that is what people turn to art for. That is art's function. It's not predictive. It's that we want art to help us understand what's happening.
Right.
And everyone has a different experience of that, or you could have a variety of insights depending on what it is. You could listen to Bach,
right,
and feel that helps you understand what's happening right now. So during the first Trump administration, a book that felt really salient was a half-century-old book, 1984, right? Like, there's no way to predict which work is going to feel especially resonant or relevant to an audience in a given time. And I don't think artists aspire to prescience necessarily, but I do think they aspire to seeing a project through and ending with something that may provide that for their audience, whatever that thing is.
Right.
That feeling of it's going to exercise something in its audience's mind.
Let's talk a little bit about the character Asher in Entitlement, this 83-year-old white billionaire. How did you build that character? If you want to reveal, were there any sort of real world folks that you drew on that character?
I felt that it would have been too easy to write a novel in which the billionaire is the bad guy. Asher, to me, and hopefully to readers, is a complicated guy. But really, he's pretty genial. He's kind of sweet. He didn't make his fortune selling missile defense systems or pharmaceuticals. He made his fortune selling office supplies. And he's used that fortune to buy art. And now he wants to give it away. Who could be against office
supplies, right? Who could be against that?
Exactly. Everything about him is ultimately defensible. He's a little racist, but he's 83. He's a little sexist, but he's 83. He's not like a Harvey Weinstein level sexual predator. Even if his interest in his protege feels like it has a little edge of something untoward. He is, to me, and I hope to readers, the more real for that. It's not interesting to me to prosecute the case of saying, like, to have billions is bad on the face of it.
Yes.
That's too easy, I think. I think it's more interesting to think, okay, if you are a genial, respectable, decent person whose politics I share, which is a big part of it, who's sort of like on the right side of history, so to speak.
Right.
How do I get him to represent a lot of things that I think are actually really bad and noxious and evil in society?
And I guess I just wanted to ask a question about Brooke. You know, she becomes obsessed with Asher, the lifestyle, and as she deepens her association with him, one could describe her as becoming warped, like making choices that maybe her family and friends don't understand. She puts on expensive shoes, using the foundation's credit card to do things. She's not being truthful about her salary, this apartment she can't afford. Like, she's behaving in ways that her family would be frustrated by. And so we don't really recognize her as time goes on. And I guess I'm wondering what lessons you think we can learn from her, from this journey that she takes that's so difficult to watch.
Well, leaving aside the question of her light criminality, which none of us should sort of participate in that.
That's agreed.
The real question, I hope, that the book is asking readers is, are we any different? Are we any more free of the influence of money and desire and the power of advertising and the power of the culture that is constantly telling us to want and to acquire? Are any of us free of that system?
Yes.
The last word of the book is free.
Yes.
And the book watches, I think, I've heard differing perceptions of this, but I think ultimately what the book offers Brooke is deliverance, and she is freed of something. In fact, I think it's the reader, and perhaps the writer as well, who is not free.
Those questions that ask us, are we any different? Whoa, those are powerful, challenging moments as you read a book. lots of the topics that you have pursued, race, class, power, how it divides us, it feels that maybe in this moment, like those topics are riskier. And I'm wondering, what's your perspective on kind of the risk you take in your work? Do you think about it that way? What should we know about when you're pursuing these topics, whether you view them as risky?
You know what's funny is that I would say that I don't, even though I'm aware that they are. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that is probably also down to Oberlin, which is not a place known for its risk-averse population, yes. Right? It's an institution that, in fact, encourages, if not rewards, a willingness to push artistically, intellectually, just in terms of pure intellectual stamina, even.
Right.
That sets your expectations for everything that comes after. So if you are having an undergraduate experience where your professors were, as mine were, saying to me, oh, what you're writing is clearly a novel, keep going. Mm-hmm. You're not hearing anyone say, oh, be careful when writing about race, because that's sensitive. Be careful when writing across the differences of sex, because that's sensitive in the contemporary culture. I never heard a message like that from any of the people who guided my education.
Right.
And I never really heard them from my peers and my fellow students. And so in a way, it doesn't come into play when I'm working. I don't have that nagging voice.
Right. Even though you know that the work may be received that way or perceived that way, it's not what's driving or animating you. You're just pursuing the art as you see it.
I also think that I hope that I have a sense that I could get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And that is okay. Yeah. Right? My new book, Entitlement, is the protagonist of the book is a Black woman. Well, I'm not a Black woman.
Although people have given you lots of praise for being able to write in the voice of women in particular.
I find that very gratifying. It makes me happy. It makes me feel like, okay, I've accomplished the task I set for myself. But I know that I have to accept the judgment of a reader who feels that I didn't accomplish that. And that is also okay. Like, I think that is also something that you have to learn in your education, that you can try and you will succeed. No one's going to succeed at 100%. This isn't a third grade spelling test. It doesn't work that way. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know?
How do you get in that voice that's not your own and that's not your background?
It certainly helps to have an experience of life where you are with people who are different.
Yeah.
And you see the fundamental humanity that is shared among all people, no matter what their demographic differences might be. If you've spent your life in the hothouse of your own identity and are unaware of the fact that other people feel exactly the same way you do.
I feel like saying, preach.
Right? I mean, everybody looks at the sky and sees it the same way. Right? Everybody wants to eat one meal that their mother makes. Everybody wants to go home and take their shoes off. Right? There are fundamental human experiences that are shared. If you are working in good faith, you can try anything. If you're working in bad faith, Godspeed. But if I were writing a novel starring, so to speak, a Black woman to prosecute the case that I hate Black women, then that's doomed to failure.
Yeah.
I have to just trust that I have a reader who will see that I'm working in good faith and hope that I get it mostly right.
Well, it reminds me of one of the things I say about what we're trying to accomplish here at Oberlin. It's why we do things like Meet Full Need and other things that tries to bring a diverse set of voices to campus. It's that we have this tagline here, think one person can change the world, so do we. And I oftentimes say to our prospective students, if you're going to go change the world for good, you doggone better have met somebody who has a different perspective than you do so you can get it right. And so I appreciate your willingness to kind of get into a zone with people who are different than you, have different perspectives than you do. It's the only way to remotely get those voices right.
That fundamental respect for difference, you have to possess that, and you have to be in places where that is a given.
So I'm wondering about the process of a work that you've labored over and now it's adapted for a movie. How that process felt to you what things were uncomfortable for you, what things were comfortable? Did it matter that the Obamas were producing it? Give the audience a sense of how you feel about that work.
Leave the World Behind was published in the fall of 2020. The conversations I was having with filmmakers were happening in the summer before that. I had this conversation with Sam Esmail, the director who ultimately directed the adaptation. We were talking on the telephone because you couldn't meet anyone in person that time.
Yes.
And we were talking about movies that we liked. He said to me, well, what was in the kind of stew of influence for this book? And I said, Mike Nichols' adaptation of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Okay.
That feeling that you're watching something, but you as the audience are kind of trapped there. You're sort of trapped at this demented cocktail party with these people. I mentioned Michael Haneke's film Funny Games, an extremely unsettling movie in which there's this explosion of violence that has no explanation. You cannot understand why these bad things are happening. And Sam, who's a filmmaker, great film goer, was like, yeah, I love that movie. I love this movie. And then he was talking about the movies that he was thinking about as he was reading the book. And we basically, all of which is to say, we had this conversation about art.
Right.
We didn't have a conversation about, I'm going to make this movie and this is what it's going to be like. We had this conversation about, this is what I care about. This is what I was thinking about. And that helped me feel a sense of trust.
Okay.
That I have come to understand is rare for the novelist having a Hollywood adventure.
Yes,
right?
yes.
But Sam was always very clear to me and in public that the book was mine, the movie is his. They relate, but they exist independently, and the one does not detract from the other. And I think that's right. And I think that's very meaningful. I think he made an amazing movie. And everything else that happened, when we're having a conference call and they're saying, well, Julia Roberts is going to be in this movie. And I was like, well, okay, sure. Mahershala Ali is going to be in this movie. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Sounds great. Like, what am I supposed to say? The President Obama and his wife, through their production company, are going to be the executive producers of this film. And you're going to go to Washington, D.C. and talk to the president. What possible response could I have to any of that besides to think, oh, this is great. This is my great good fortune. Whatever the fleeting conflicts of ego or whatever, that stuff is immaterial in the end. And interestingly, just as immaterial is being nominated for the National Book Award. An incredible thing, meant a lot to me, is fleeting in the larger context of life. And I'll tell you what, you have teenagers, so I hardly have to tell you this. Teenagers don't care if you're nominated for the National Book Award.
Oh my God, no.
They do not care. They don't care they don't even know who Julia Roberts is. God bless them. They don't care about that stuff. And I think that's useful.
Yes.
I care about that stuff. It's my job to care about it. I am proud of that. What comes next is what comes next. And what matters most is what matters most. And I know the differences. You don't write a book so that you can get Julia Roberts to be in the movie.
Right.
You do it because it's this thing that you've been preparing to do your whole life, and there's a thing that you care about, and there are ideas that you care about. There's an honesty to that. It's difficult. It's difficult to start. I have to start on page one. I say this a lot when I teach writers. It's difficult for everyone. I've had conversations with writers who have won the Nobel Prize. And there is a sense that it is just as hard for them on page one as it is for everyone else. And I find that sort of reassuring. Leave the World Behind, to me, was a book about the environment. Entitlement is a book about money. And my new book is about something that is deeply unfashionable in the contemporary literature, which is God.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This idea that you care about what you care about. And you've actually done well, have had a readership, have accomplished the metrics of success, but you haven't done it for those reasons. You've done it because you wanted to legislate this idea, get it out onto the page and get it out of your head.
No, I love that. It's one of the things that you hear lots of the artists that I get a chance to talk to, this thing inside of you that says you have to do it, you have to get it out. But recognizing that it's a privilege to be able to do. And it's really special.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it, because it's the urgency, but also the love.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of writers and a lot of artists generally who are in a position where the urgency is with respect to the art, and then the necessity is working as a waiter. They make that calculation. That is how life works. And I have had a different experience of it, and that is a privilege. And I actually feel a responsibility to work harder because I succeeded. Success in this context means a couple of different things. If I were talking to an auntie, what she would mean is that you have enough money to feed your children and pay your mortgage. Yes,
Right.
that is success.
That is a
no
version,
question.
right?
No question. You're talking to another kind of person, and to them, it's, oh, you have a commercial publisher and you are nominated for awards. Yes, those are great metrics of success. But the meaningful one is the one that I employ, which is, did I finish the book?
Right.
Are there 5 good sentences in this whole book that I stand by? As long as I can say yes to that, then I want to keep going forward.
And that you've been able to measure success in multiple ways.
Yeah.
I just think it's so powerful. And I really thank you for the good work that you're putting out in the world, and giving us all wonderful things to read and to see in ways that make us proud. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Running to the Noise, a podcast produced by Oberlin College and Conservatory. Our music is composed by Professor of Jazz Guitar Bobby Ferraza and performed by the Oberlin Sonny Rollins Jazz Ensemble, a student group created through the support of the legendary jazz musician. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this episode online so Obies and other folks can find us too. I'm Carmen Twillie Ambar, and I'll be back soon with more great conversations from thought leaders on and off our campus.